When I went there, I realized that there were completely ordinary people who had similar dreams to mine, who perhaps didn't want to work a salaried job for the rest of their lives, so to speak, and who were looking for a way out. And 10 years later, when we had our class reunion and we opened those letters, I think I had written that by the time I'm 30, I'll be living in my own house. And, and then I remembered that about 2 or 3 weeks before I turned 30, I had made my first major real estate deal and bought myself a plot of land to start building a house on. I remember when I graduated from university, I had the feeling that I was now fully prepared for life and didn't need to learn much more. And at one point, I realized that there are actually many topics that weren't discussed in school or university, and I needed to consciously start working on self-development and learning completely new subjects. It was the summer of 2008, beautiful warm summer weather, and I went rollerblading with a good friend of mine. And at one point, we sat down on a park bench for a moment and just started, talking about life. I told my friend that I'd somehow reached a point where I didn't have any big dreams in my life right now, that everything was sort of in place, that the dreams I had, when I was younger had sort of been achieved, and every day is this routine, going to work from Monday to Friday, and I don't have any big dream that would, put a spark in my eye. And then I realized that I needed to find a completely new direction, and then I shared a story about how in our, last class at the end of high school, it was our homeroom class, we had to write a letter to ourselves. And the title of the letter was Where I'll Be in 10 Years. And I remember that I wrote in the letter that I'm living in my own house. I'm involved in business and have an active professional life. And I put in the envelope, I remember, I think it was a 5 or 10 ruble note. And it was sort of like a seed for the future or for investments. It was only in hindsight that I later realized that it was like a small sign of the journey that would later unfold. And 10 years later, when we had our class reunion and we opened those letters, I think I had written that by the time I'm 30, I'll be living in my own house. And then I remembered that about 2 or 3 weeks before I turned 30, I had made my first major real estate deal and bought myself a plot of land to start building a house on. So subconsciously, that same decision or plan was in my mind, in my subconscious, that by 30, I want to be living in my own house. And it also shows, in a way, how powerful our own thoughts are. And if we truly feel we want something, then it's actually possible to make all those dreams come true. And at that same class reunion, when we opened the letters, I had a classmate who had written in our last class of high school that in 10 years he would be a pastor in a small village. And when he opened the letter, he said, "This is exactly what I'm doing today. I'm in that village, I'm a pastor, and I'm very happy with what I do." And we actually know deep down what we want, but sometimes maybe it's these fears or the unknown that holds us back from making those changes. And as I was sharing this story, I kind of remembered that this had been my dream up to that point, but I hadn't figured out what the next dream was. And I felt very strongly that working a Monday to Friday job was something I didn't want to do for the rest of my life. And I felt that I wanted more freedom, I wanted more time for myself, maybe to travel more and maybe to have more control over my own, weekly schedule. And I realized that I didn't know how to do it. And that same summer, an opportunity came up to go for the first time to a club where people who were learning about financial literacy got together and played this fun board game called the Cash Flow board game. Since I had read about this game a few years earlier in the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I had become interested in trying the game myself at some point. And when I got there, I realized that they were just ordinary people who had similar dreams as I did, who maybe didn't want to, work a salaried job for the rest of their lives and were looking for a way out, who wanted to start a business, who had maybe made their first investments and who were looking for ways to make money work for them. And when I went there, it was a very inspiring, very positive environment. I saw that I wasn't alone with my thoughts, that there were actually many, many other people who were looking for answers to the same questions. And I felt that I had somehow found a good environment where I wanted to be all the time. And when I had played the game, and in the context of the game, gotten out of the rat race, so the game showed how people who work salaried jobs every day are kind of in this rat race, and if they can make money work for them, they can get out of the rat race. And when I got out of the rat race in the game, I thought, interesting, what if I were to play this game again with my real-life numbers? What would that look like? What would my profession card be in real life? I was very inspired. I went home and And I thought I'll find my, real life numbers and put them into the, personal financial statement that came with the game. And when I looked at my, real life profession card, at that time I was working as a company manager, I realized that while I had a very good income, I also had very high expenses. And in order to move towards, financial freedom, I needed to create assets that would cover my expenses. But since my expenses at that time were quite high, I realized that I was very far from actually getting out of the rat race. And if I want to start moving in that direction, I have to make some pretty big changes in my personal life. And the second discovery was that I realized that in order to win this game in real life as well, I needed to start creating assets. And when I wrote down those numbers, I discovered that I didn't have a single asset that would bring me monthly income. So the only way to cover my monthly expenses was to go back to work on Monday and get that paycheck at the end of the month to pay my living expenses. So I remember that it was a very strong wake-up call. I realized that I had two choices. I had the choice to continue as I was, and I knew that this dissatisfaction would likely grow over time, or to find the courage to start acquiring new knowledge from a completely different angle, so to speak, and make a major U-turn in my life. So that was perhaps the moment of change that got me moving. But if you think about your own situation today, maybe you also have that kind of dissatisfaction, or you have a financial situation today where you feel that things could actually be much better. Then I can tell you as an encouragement that it is actually possible for everyone, that this knowledge in hindsight is simple. It's knowledge that might be difficult to arrive at on your own, but if someone explains these things and just lays them out, so to speak, then we just need time to start putting that knowledge into practice. And if we commit to this journey and start implementing these things step by step, so to speak, then the changes are actually quite fast. And it's possible for us within, let's say, 3 to 5 years to make a U-turn where we can actually get money to work for us instead of working for money every day. To make that change, you need to have a proper cash reserve built up. And often, the reason people don't start acquiring new knowledge is that they haven't set aside money for self-development. And I remember that when I realized that I needed to start saving separately for this, so to speak, at some point it was no longer a question of whether I could afford this training or course, but which course I wanted to take and what was the topic that spoke to me at that moment. So these are perhaps a few thoughts you could think about today. Maybe you recognize yourself in this story. Maybe your situation is completely different, but it is definitely possible to change things. And to make that change, you don't need to have a lot of knowledge today, but you do need to make the decision to start acquiring that knowledge. And certainly, what might be good news for those who maybe didn't do very well in school or didn't have good grades is that the education we received in school, in the academic sense, so to speak, does not define our potential or determine our potential in terms of how successful we can be in, so to speak, financial education, and how much it's possible for us to actually act much more wisely there and at some point put money to work for us.